Welcome to the Step Forward Report. My name is Kyle Hendon, Communications Director for Humanity Forward Arizona, bringing you important news from the Humanity Forward movement, Humanity First movement, and Humanity Forward Arizona. Politico Zach Monterero reported that Andrew Yang suing the New York Board of Elections in federal court for the cancellation of the New York primaries amidst the depths of the coronavirus epidemic. On first glance, it may seem reasonable to cancel the primaries. New York was the epicenter of the epidemic in the United States and is still dealing with the ramifications of the virus. The health and safety of New York voters is important to consider, but also the health of our democracy. Yang states the decision to deny voters due process and denies voters the right to vote, and therefore must be invalidated, removing the authority for the defendant to take the actions complained of herein. We don't live in the 20th century. Mail voting could be implemented on a state and city level to ensure democracy and health precautions are properly balanced. While Andrew is not considered to win the state primary steadily, down-ballot candidates, including several pro-UBI candidates like Jonathan Herzog, would be excluded from the voting process if the elections are canceled. I applaud Andrew for his courage in taking this action to federal court and prompting action instead of just releasing a statement. Yang also headlines this week participating in the All Americans campaign, centered to bring focus to discriminatory actions stemming from the epidemic. Celebrities like Dave Chappelle and Megan Rapinoe, along with several dozens of celebrities across the realms of politics, sports, and entertainment, have joined forces for the All Americans movement, a cross-cultural campaign unifying Americans stand together against marginalized communities most affected by COVID-19. Humanity Forward, Humanity First movement, and Humanity Forward Arizona support the All Americans campaign and hope to stem violence against these communities where we can. Arizona was also in the national spotlight this week, with President Trump announcing he will take a trip to Phoenix on May 5th. The Arizona Republic's Yvonne Sanchez explained that it will be the president's first trip outside Washington, D.C. since May 28th. He will be visiting Honeywell Industries to highlight the company's investment into medical supplies to fight the coronavirus. This visit does not include one of his famous rallies. Humanity Forward Arizona plans to monitor his visit and see if there's an opportunity to discuss more stimulus checks for the American people. Astrid Galvan of the Associated Press reported on an important development regarding the southern border wall. Pre-pandemic plans to construct a $55.8 million addition to the border wall in Yuma are going ahead despite protests from communities at the border wall construction site. Residents, including Emily Saunders, argued that construction workers are bringing the virus to small communities that have yet to encounter the effects of the coronavirus. These communities have limited capacity to help residents if they do not contract the disease, and argue that it's a risk not worth the construction of the wall. U.S. Rep. Raul Grijalva stated, "We are continuing to push that it has to be paused. That is a health risk during this emergency. That's not to say that the environmental damage it's doing. I would like them to halt it permanently. But even when we ask for a pause, no reaction and not even a comment back from Homeland Security or the Justice Department." Proponents of the border wall argue it will increase effectiveness in limiting the drug and human smuggling on our southern border. Proponents and protesters are welcome to come on our show to have a more elaborate discussion. Lastly, regional directors from Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, Kansas, New Mexico, and Utah are holding their first Southwest Region Summit over Zoom Friday, May 1st at 6:30 to 7:30. We hope to further integrate our efforts on a state-by-state basis, share best practices we have discovered founding Humanity Forward Arizona, and connect with each other during this quarantine. The link is in the description. We hope you can join us. This was a Step Forward report. Next, we have Humanity Forward President Brendon Carpenter to have a discussion on leadership during the Yang campaign and the formation of Humanity Forward Arizona. Hello, welcome to the Step Forward podcast. My name is Kyle Hendon, and today we are sitting down with the president of Humanity Forward Arizona to have a discussion about leadership. Brendon Carpenter, thank you for being here, my friend.
Well, thank you, Kyle. It's a pleasure to give you some of my thoughts.
We're all looking forward to it. Today I want to talk a little bit about your leadership experiences running the Andrew Yang campaign in Arizona and now being a founding board member of Humanity Forward Arizona. So what is leadership in your mind?
You know, I feel like I'm still trying to figure out what it is. But, I fell into this position after joining the Andrew Yang presidential campaign and realizing that a lot of our volunteers had no prior political experience. So I've been a community organizer and I've worked on campaigns for the last 10 years. And I realized I was the best person suited to get the presidential campaign off the ground in Arizona and organize our volunteers. And really, there's all different types of leaders. There's different types of leadership styles. But the main thing that a leader needs to do is to be able to recognize what the needs are to accomplish their group's vision and to communicate that efficiently to the rest of the group in order to accomplish something. So leadership to me is always trying to figure out where the needs are and where the shortest path towards your goal is.
That's well put, Brendon. I've been studying organizational leadership at my ASU classes, and there's a pretty contested debate whether leadership is a learned ability or an inherent trait. I kind of lean towards more it's a learned ability. Like, you can't force an Abraham Lincoln into someone not to be an Abraham Lincoln, but you can teach them aspects to help them grow as a leader to a point. Do you think you encountered a lot of this during the campaign?
Yeah, I think that different people are born with different levels of self-awareness and awareness of the feelings of others, and it also comes from our childhood in a lot of cases. Like, did we come from a household that helped us be confident and gave us the assurance that we knew what we were doing, or do we come from a background that it was more about following orders of other people? Regardless of what your background is, you can rise up to the occasion. And just like anything, leadership is a skill that it just takes training in order to master.
Another thing I saw while we were campaigning is how well you recognize strengths of people of yourself and your team members. For example, you helped me develop my administrative and organizational skills, while some people really need to favor team building and relationship building. What would you think your main leadership strength was or is?
I see myself as a servant leader. I try to get to know everyone in our organization as best as I can. Time is limited as a leader. I have a very small bandwidth, but every moment I get with someone in person, I try to ask questions that aren't just surface level questions. I try to get to know them in the brief amount of time that I have, and then it's easier to identify abilities and skills when you're working with someone over a longer period of time. But I feel like I'm always in that, like, sending out a radar and trying to figure out where people fit in best. Because if you can put someone into a role that they're good at, then they'll enjoy the work and they'll be able to thrive as well as help you. And that's doubly important in volunteer organizations where if you're not getting paid, then you sure as hell better enjoy what you're doing, or else you'll get out of there.
I think that quality was especially important throughout the campaign, especially because we were kind of isolated from the greater efforts of the Andrian campaign. Speaking of the man, to me, he was really the epitome of what we'd call in my class an ethical leader, who embraces humanity in his character, his action and goals, his honesty, power, and values, which transitioned well to his supporter base. How important is it to you to kind of embody this ethical leader here in Arizona?
That's a great point. Andrew Yang has a very specific leadership profile that it really brings together a lot of different leadership styles, and it really shows you that he has natural ability and has spent his career developing those skills. It is very important for me to be an ethical leader. If you get caught doing something unethical, there's no better way to shoot your organization in the foot, lose trust, have people doubt your vision and your mission, and things just go to crap real quickly that way. So I always try to do the right thing and do it efficiently and stay focused on my objective. I'm still learning how to do it, though. There's some situations as a leader that you don't have easy choices, and it's up to you to figure out which choice it may just be better. And sometimes it doesn't feel good. Like if you have to share hard news with your volunteers about failures of the organization or their weaknesses. And I think all in all, if a leader can be humble and be compassionate, you can find your way through those types of conflicts, and it's just a matter of time before you become the ethical leader that you aspire to be.
I know we all like to have Andrew Yang as our example, but is there any other leaders you have followed and in your past, and why have you followed them?
Well, I'm I think I grew up with a little bit of a problem with authority for whatever reason. So following leaders has not been my strong suit. There's always a part of me, like in the back of my mind, that just wonders if they're really being authentic. And so to me, uh, discovering that a leader really is speaking truthfully and that they have good intentions is critical for me to follow them. And so I've worked on several political campaigns, and I could list you a bunch of candidates, but that I've worked with. But probably the only other leader other than Andrew Yang that really inspired me was Bernie Sanders. And he has specific weaknesses that Andrew Yang doesn't. For example, he is very combative, and and sometimes he'll have followers that do extreme things and say extreme things, and he'll scold them in front of the media and say that they're not part of his campaign. But it's not like he goes out of his way to change the culture within his movement. And I think that was a striking difference with Andrew Yang, because Andrew Yang put out to all of the volunteer leaders, all of the people working on his campaign, a set of values and a code of conduct that ensured that we knew that we weren't the type of campaign that would slander other people or treat people disrespectfully. And so I really appreciated that. What I did like about Bernie Sanders that's still has won my respect of him, at least, is that he speaks truth to power. He's not afraid to talk about the things that get you in trouble in the mainstream media. And so he's definitely a truth teller. And I would say that Andrew Yang is the same way, but he has a different demeanor about it.
I definitely agree with that assessment. As someone who did follow Sanders as well in 2016, he did. I really think his demeanor and that truth telling capability had a large amount of people able to follow them and see themselves in him. But maybe they weren't. There was a disconnect between how we wanted to present our visions. And while working with I do want to talk a little bit about the nature of the internet and relationship and leadership building, because there is that common trope on the internet that part of your follower base, no matter who you are or what group you're running, that's going to become toxic just by the nature and by the anonymity the internet provides. How do you think leaders should really deal with this new advent in technology and making sure our supporters are not slandering or being unkind online?
Yeah, it's tough. I always talk to people about how, like, prehistorically, humans lived in very small groups. We come from small villages, and the people that were around you in your day to day life were your family and friends that you'd have maybe over your whole lifetime. And there was a scientist, I think his name's Professor Dunbar, and he estimated from his anthropological work that humans really only have the bandwidth for having relationships with about 150 people, which mimics where we came from, like the types of groups we were engaged
I
in.
remember that study.
Right, yeah, and so now we're in this world where we're dealing with not 150 people. In many cases, it's thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of people, and there's always conversations going on about you if you're a leader of such a large organization, and it's so hard to manage it. And so Really, a leader needs to delegate in a lot of cases, delegate out as much as possible when there are issues that you don't have the bandwidth to cover. That's what I feel that Bernie Sanders did poorly. He wanted to win so bad, he was focusing so much of his attention on winning and not on managing his own followers and how they were viewed by the media and other people. And it really, I would venture to guess this is based on my own experiences in social media, but it's something like 1 to 5% at most are these toxic actors, these bad actors, but they make all the difference in uh, bringing down someone's reputation. So in politics especially, it's not a game of beating down your opponent. You really have to build up coalitions, build up trust, build up alliances in order to get anything done in politics because it's majority rules any way that you look at it. So I would say that in this new age, leaders should delegate out to other staffers or other volunteers that they trust as much as possible this task of maintaining a positive culture within the whole organization. There's ways to do it. There's training manuals out there. HR departments know how to do it.
That's an interesting assertion, because one of the things I enjoyed about the Yang campaign compared to other political organizations and campaigns was there's a very loose control of our constituency in which we were allowed to really utilize the Yang name and speak on behalf of Andrew without explicitly getting permission. While other political campaigns really have tight control of their brand and they try to control everything that's going out.
Yeah.
Do you think this is the way the new version of politics, where there's a looser sense of control, or do you think leaders need to have a tighter control on their base moving forward?
Right, that's a good question. So what I was talking about with delegating out the monitoring and moderation of your organization, it's not mutually exclusive with having a decentralized movement, a decentralized organization where there's a lot of autonomy down at the local level. So what I saw in the Andrew Yang campaign is that they did give local leaders in different states a lot of leeway to whatever their group's creativity produced. They said run with it, but as long as it followed through with the humanity first values. And Andrew Yang talked constantly about humanity first values throughout his whole campaign and respecting people from the other side. That's where his slogan comes from: not left, not right, but forward. And so it's these little things, these little slogans, these little talking points that he addressed that then filtered down throughout his whole national organization. And I took it upon myself as my responsibility to make sure that everyone in Arizona was following the humanity first values and that we were embodying the idea of not left, not right, but forward. So that's what I see as delegation. But otherwise, we were given a lot of freedom to do things how we saw that they were the most optimal. And it's totally true, Kyle. It's a revolution in organizing to create these more decentralized structures. You're going to see them more and more.
I really think it worked too. One of the most formative experiences of the campaign for myself is when I got an invitation from the Students for Trump at ASU to go to the Trump rally, and we took my my officers, someone that was Republican, another that was pretty liberal, Bernie Democrat, and we were able to get along perfectly with the students our age at ASU, and the leader actually became a friend of mine. And as we talked to the Trump supporters at the rally, they were happy to see us and happy to talk to us. And
Oh
after we
yeah.
were done talking to them, we went over to the protesters on the Democratic side, and they all clapped and said our chant and said our slogans, and were happy to see us. Like we even
Awesome.
broke up
Yeah.
a protest, like a little scuffle between a Antifa member and one of those more outrageous Trump supporters,
Yeah.
and they
All
were fine with
right. That's exactly the when you said that you were going to go do that. I was so proud of you and the rest of the Tempe Yang Gang, because that's the perfect type of embodiment of our values. And you know, it's important to realize in this current moment, it seems normal to be so polarized and to treat Trump supporters with disrespect and just do whatever it takes to bring them down if you're on the left, and vice versa, right? But we, the history of our country, in the history of our country, we had a political culture where people did come together and talk about different issues. Now it was mostly white people or you know, white men, and so there were parts of society that were left out of that. But we do have this tradition of coming together and solving problems and not being divided by our identities. And I, right now is really a low moment for our democracy that we don't have that right now, and that's why you see so much gridlock and we're unable to get much done in our government. And so we really do have, it's up to us. I don't see anyone else who is able to do it. It's up to people like us to uh, put out the flames and bring people together around solving problems. And if we don't do that, there's the 21st century is going to roll us so badly. I don't know if we're going to be able to make it to the other side if we don't have this culture of coming together and dealing with the crises that are ahead of us.
I was going to talk a little bit about inclusivity and diversity a little bit later, but since you brought it up, we can go
Sure.
into it now.
Yeah.
There's this debate in organizational leadership on how to bring diverse communities into your organization in a healthy manner.
Mm-hmm.
I One of the critiques I heard commonly on the campaign trail from the right was that Democrats kind of virtue signal about their
Mm-hmm.
inclusivity measures, and they don't actually help. They don't actually bring the positive inclusivity that we want, and that
Mm-hmm.
kind of manifested in their loyalty towards Donald Trump. Do you think Democrats need to reassess how they work to include diverse communities, or do you think the right needs to realize that their approach is necessary to make sure these voices are heard?
That is a very interesting question, and I wish I knew the perfect answer. That's probably one of the questions of our time, how to do that. But I will say, you know, I went around to a lot of Democratic Party meetings in Maricopa County as the leader of the Arizona Yang Gang, trying to represent our group and our campaign among all the regulars. And it was striking how many people in those meetings were older white people. Like, even in downtown Phoenix, they had that same demographic. And so while the Democratic Party, you know, talks a good talk, and they even have quotas, for example, for their delegates that go to the national convention to be a part of certain categories. They want their delegates to match their constituents demographically. So there's a lot of diversity appointments to meet certain quotas. And so they do that, but they're still not walking the walk, because if they were, then their meetings would be much more representative. The people who actually come out and get involved. And what I see is an issue that I faced a lot in the early days of when I was community organizing in Utah. And you know, a lot of people joke about Utah being this weird white mountain state, but it's actually very diverse. There's all kinds of communities there. One of the largest Polynesian community actually in the United States outside of Hawaii is in Salt Lake, and I would notice that people would group up, even at political meetings. They would tend to group up with people of their own race or background or language, and there's a part of that that's natural, but I think that much more needs to be done to bring people together. And there's different models that are being worked on that could be fruitful. I don't think anyone has figured it out in politics yet. But for example, this is one reason I really like the local local first decentralized kind of organization for movements, because you can create a group in a certain neighborhood with a certain demographic profile, either rich, poor, black, white, Latino, Spanish speaking, whatever the lines are you want to draw. But you can create these local groups where people feel comfortable being around people like them. But then you want to create some kind of funnel so that the people in these local groups are being advertised about larger events that bring together multiple local chapters together to hear different speakers or plan different events and so forth. And so there has to be this way where we have to create systems where people can be brought in and they feel comfortable in a smaller group that are their peers and their neighbors. But then there's someone from the outside there that's also representing the other groups and inviting people to join these larger events, so that when people feel comfortable, they can go up a level and meet more people from the rest of the city or the rest of the state, and then go back to their local group and invite other people. And so there's this cross-pollination of different identities that's much more fluid. And frankly, I don't think we're going to be able to figure out how to do that exactly anytime soon, but it's a goal for us to figure out how to do that effectively.
If I may pose my tentative theory based off my studies, America kind of has this notion that we're a melting pot, or we ought to be a melting pot, where we need to meld our cultures together, and some people need to let go some aspects of their cultures, become American, and need to embrace other specific stuff. That's largely a 20th century notion, especially because when it was first happening in the early 1900s, it was mainly Caucasian people of different nationalities that were trying to assimilate. But then we made a lot of advances in the civil rights movement, and that muddied the waters, because that was an extra level of complexity into assimilating people like that. Now, current leadership theorists kind of prefer a salad analogy, where diverse communities are able to retain their roots and don't have to let go of anything to be American, but are just they are what they are, and that completes and that is enough for them to be American and to be one in our communities. We just need to pair them together nicely.
Yeah.
And what I really like
that analogy. Yeah.
I think in politics it's important to have policies that are universal in nature, that don't require you to conform or to let go of any of your cultural heritage to be a part of. I think that was one of the successes of the Yang campaign, where we just had so much diversity, but it wasn't even an issue that we were all together. We were just all fighting for the same thing without having to sacrifice who we were.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the country of freedom and choice, and it's against human nature to expect people to give up their backgrounds, their loyalty to where they come from or their culture, And you can see this in a lot of like people that are first or second generation Americans, where their parents are from a different country, but they've grown up in the States, where they can pass really easily between one set of expectations and another. And I think that's a beautiful thing. When I went and lived in Brazil for 2 years on a religious mission and learned Portuguese, I learned a lot about the Brazilian culture that I still carry with me today. I'm not Brazilian, but there's attractive features of their culture, um, and we should feel like that we can adapt, we can take on things from other cultures that help us. I really disagree with this idea that cultural appropriation is so dangerous. Yeah, you don't want to mock other cultures and denigrate them, but it's a form of respect to take something on yourself. And so that's not a melting pot exactly, but I guess when you stir the salad, everything stays different, but it soaks up the salad dressing or what have
There
you.
we go.
It takes a new.
America is a salad dressing.
Yeah, exactly. It's yeah,
Everything all together.
we could work on this metaphor, Kyle, but but we
So
don't
you did
have to all become the same. We should embrace our differences and learn from each other as well.
So you mentioned you went to Brazil, and I think it would be great to go a little bit deeper into your own personal experiences in leadership. Can you tell us a little
Yeah.
an event prior to even the Sanders campaign that kind of helped you mold into the leader you are today?
Oh, that's so nice of you to be curious about that part of my life, Kyle. Yeah, that was definitely the formative experience that set me on my path towards becoming a political activist, community organizer, and all the way to this point. So I served a 2-year mission to Brazil for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormons. And I learned Portuguese. I was sent to the north of the country, in a city called Fortaleza. So it was the most impoverished state of Brazil. So, I like to tell people that Brazil is a modern country. You can go to Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro or other cities in the south, and it just seems like you're in Europe. But specifically, the state I was in was still villages and slums and poverty that you just don't see at all in America. And so I ended up rising through the ranks among the missionaries, and I got to a point where I was a district leader, and I was training other missionaries that were newer than me how to do the work. And we spent every day more than 8 hours a day just knocking doors and teaching people lessons and being involved in community service, helping people build houses, clean their yards, just anything that needed to happen. And that's where I really developed this identity of service. And because I was able to see so much poverty and so many people that, talking to them in Portuguese, I got to the point, it just seemed like they had all the potential, all the intelligence and charisma that they needed to be successful in America, other than speaking English and not having a visa to get there. And they were trapped in situations of deep poverty and lacked so much opportunity. And it really lit a fire in my soul that there's just so many great people out there. People are basically good, but it's our circumstances, it's our societies that we've created, it's the economies that we've created that constantly abuses people and exploits people and wastes their potential. And I don't care how long it takes me, but I'm going to fight for the rest of my life for a world where people have value and everyone else recognizes their value and they can utilize their potential. It's a crime against humanity to deny perfectly great people, perfectly normal people, the chance to succeed and have a comfortable life. And there's it's going to be a long road to fight for that on a global stage. I think we can, once we achieve that here in America, it'll be much easier to do that. So that's why I'm focusing on American politics. But yeah,
that kind
still
of harpers to
yeah.
Ongoing debate you and I have been having about how we should structure ourselves in Humanity Forward Arizona, where I've been wanting to make us stronger as an organization. And I think the best way to do that is starting to pay our volunteers and make them employees. Now
Yeah.
I'm not saying you're to be clear, you're not against that notion. It's just like ongoing conversation we've been having. So
Right.
what is your 2 cents? At what point do you think volunteerism runs out?
Wow, that's this is an important discussion for sure. My cousin said one time that I love this line where he's like, free labor ended in the 1860s. uh, and volunteers are not slaves. We try to treat them well, and we're okay with working with volunteers that have certain needs, like they need flexibility with time or they need help to volunteer. So we'll do everything we can to help our volunteers, but when it comes to paying them and hiring staff, it's a reality that we have to face, is that nonprofits, by because of the nature of nonprofits, we're not very profitable. Usually there's limited resources to go around, and we have such huge goals for our state and that are going to require lots of resources, lots of money, lots of time in order to make it happen, and we have to be strategic with that.
Mm-hmm.
However, it would be a violation of our principles to just never pay our volunteers who are helping so much. That is absolutely priority number one for me to get to the point where we're bringing in enough revenue through donations or sales or anything else so that we can pay our team members that are doing most of the work, like you. And that's going to help all of our volunteers feel valued, to be able to pay their bills, accomplish other things in their lives, like maybe even starting a family or investing in their own skills and education. And not paying people is unsustainable. We have to pay people eventually.
I know we have discussed a kind of workaround that's been proposed by other leaders, including Andrew Yang, is a time banking initiative. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, time banking is one of the more underappreciated policies that Andrew Yang had on his website, and he talked about it a little bit, but I think
it was in his book too.
Yeah, he went into great detail. War on Normal People. If you haven't read that and you're listening to this, you definitely need to. But time banking has been around for a while, and the idea is that we can, as communities, we can share platforms where someone who volunteers, they can log it into a platform, and it gets remembered, and it banks up a certain amount of credits that then other people can redeem by volunteering for something that you need. So it's like a system, a community system for giving and asking for favors, basically. And Andrew Yang called this also social credits. And what he imagined is that if we can get to a system where time banking has the support of the government, then you would have an incentive to volunteer and win certain prizes, like maybe a front row seat at the next city meeting, or you could reserve a spot at the park, or you could get recognition on the website. There's all kinds of ways to reward people, and most people, they are driven by incentives, and a lot of volunteers don't get recognized. They don't get favors in return, and a lot of volunteers get burnt out, and then they stop volunteering because they don't see any benefits coming to them. And some people will say, well, you should just be selfless and just continue fighting for the things you believe in and helping other people no matter what. And that's just not how humans work. We're social creatures that do good to others, hoping that someday it'll come around to them. And we've got to ensure that it does come around to them. We have to create a system that makes karma into a real thing, and not just an idea.
One of the things I always like to tell people is that you shouldn't speak out against something if you don't have a better replacement for it. And what I try to embody in that is, just because something is maybe be wrong or working poorly, it's there for a reason. And if you're going to replace it, you have to have something better, or else people will, if it's not better, people won't gravitate towards it. I think that's kind of the stark difference between the Yang supporters and the Sanders supporters, where they saw that there was injustice in the world and wanted to force change on a governmental level.
Mm-hmm.
While the Yang supporters wanted to realign incentives so that so people want to have that change and want to have a better environment and want to help each other more. Do you think that's a accurate sentiment, being a leader in the Sanders campaign previously, or?
I think there would be a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters, if they heard that they would argue against that point, which is totally fine. There's a lot of diversity in the Bernie Sanders campaign and among Democratic Socialists as well. And so I will say, though, that is a generalization that rings true more than not, where Yang supporters see society as the product of a system of incentives and rules, and that there's ways to tweak them, to improve them based on data to optimize the whole system. Whereas Bernie Sanders and his followers and Democratic Socialists, they see the whole system as the product of a ruling class that is engaged in class warfare against the working class, and that really you need to bring out some form of guillotine in order to destroy the evil and corrupt influence inside of the systems in order to perfect it. And what the problems they run into is they imagine that the structures that would be most optimal have already been discovered over in Scandinavia, in Europe generally, and that we just need to implement them here in order to create the kind of future we want. And if you do a deep dive in the governments in Scandinavia and in Europe, they have a lot of problems too. They have a lot of other issues that their systems have created. And why does that get ignored? Why is it that we Bernie Sanders supporters want us to become like Scandinavia, and when a lot of Scandinavian countries don't even define themselves as socialist? So I think there needs to be a lot more work done on their side to look into the issues with the governments over there and create a better system. And as they do that, they'll realize that we're further ahead on figuring those systems out, and I hope they'll join us.
I definitely agree with that assessment. One of the things that it's tough when you're talking to Sanders supporters is that we basically agree with their general premise that our system is broken. We just kind of have different ways we want to fix it. But I'd like to kind of change gears to talk a little bit more about Humanity Forward Arizona.
Cool.
So, if for those who have not heard, we chartered on 420 of last month. It was a great time, but one of the things I saw that was really I think profound is the amount of time we spent on crafting our vision. I'm going to read it aloud to you real quick.
Yeah.
Humanity Forward Arizona is committed to the vision of a government that serves and supports humanity with a focus on policy that enhances our well-being as well as our economic value and safety. What do you think this vision really encapsulates for Arizona, and why did we make this decision?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time. It's true. We spent 2 months discussing these different potential missions and visions, and tried to drill down to just the very basics of what our movement was about. And obviously, as a 501c4, we're going to be engaged in political organization and advocacy, as well as helping our communities directly. And so we had to have a vision of a government being the body that accomplishes our vision. There's no way to do what we want to do to get to the world we want without the power of government. There's just no other force that has the resources to do that. So that's why we had the government. We had the focus so much to be on our government here in Arizona and in Washington, D.C. And then having in our vision mentioning that we're supporting humanity with a focus on policy. Humanity, not just the citizens in Arizona, and maybe not even Arizonans or Americans, but all of humanity. So it's a recognition that all of humanity is facing huge problems in the future, be it climate change, artificial intelligence, automation, government corruption, internet addiction. The list goes on, and all the leadership classes have been ignoring these building problems largely. They've kicked the can down the road with so many of these different issues for different reasons. And really, it is time for all of humanity to come together and face these problems together, or else we may not have a humanity here in 100 years. People think that sounds like an exaggeration, but when you look at all these problems, if we don't make progress, it's over. That's my perspective. Maybe other people aren't feeling it's so dire, but we're bringing together people who want to work hard now to solve those problems. And so really it's a call to arms. Our vision is a call to arms that we need a government that supports all of humanity through actual policies, or we don't have a future.
I definitely agree with that. Change must be had, and I do think we're in a good position to make that change, especially in terms of our own internal the Yang apparatus that we currently find ourselves in. I want to talk a little bit about how you handle problems that aren't caused by you. I remember early on in the Yang campaign, there was a sexual harassment allegation leveled at a campaign staff member. While Arizona itself wasn't connected with the national campaign, I remember you still decided to respond. What did you do, and why was it so important for us to act quickly?
Yeah, that's a great example of one of our more successful moments as the Arizona Yang Gang that I hope all the other chapters of Humanity Forward can learn from. And so these allegations came out It was Alyssa Milano who mentioned it and rose awareness after seeing some tweets from different women that had grievances against the Yang campaign. And Alyssa Milano had formerly been a supporter, so it really hit hard that we had lost her confidence. And we had a lot of people on Twitter that were saying that proved that Andrew Yang was alt-right and the Yang gang was alt-right and we're a bunch of sexists, and it just seemed so unfair because after months and months of hard work, I hadn't seen any alt-right people or any acts of sexual harassment or misconduct at all. Like our group was working so well, and I realize there's some people who will say, "Well, Brendon, you're just a white guy. You can't. Maybe you just didn't notice things that were happening." But we really, every event that I went to, we had such a good like camaraderie with all of our people, and I felt compelled to stand up for that and not let other people paint us in a certain way when it was so far from the truth. So what we did is I got together the other volunteer leaders, and we decided we would start a human resources committee. And so we had 3 men, 3 women, two members that were members of the LGBTQ community. So we had lots of diversity in this committee, and we put out an official statement on all of our social media channels and emailed out to our members that we recognized that these allegations had come out, and that in an effort to protect our members that we were forming this committee, and that we encouraged everyone to have to face these news of misconduct with compassion and rationality and respect for due process for both the victim and the accuser, because otherwise things can just spiral up out of control and can escalate. And it's not about ignoring when victims come forward and raise the alarm. It's just that we need data. We need hard evidence in order to follow the due process and give everyone the respect that they deserve as humans. And so we put that out there, and we put out forms so that we made it really easy so that if any one of our volunteers had problems with harassment or abuse of any kind, that they could reach out to the committee and we could begin an investigation. And I'm proud to say that we didn't have a single complaint throughout the campaign, that those forms were never used as they were intended. And also, the only emails that we got to the Human Resources Committee were emails of gratitude from women who were thankful that we were doing the right thing and providing a structure to protect our volunteers and address any issues that might come up. And, I just think, just to end a long story there, I think that when we see problems, we shouldn't have to wait for the guy at the very top, the leader at the very top, to tell us what to do. We should just go out and start solving the problems with as many other people as we can and do the best we can. And if we fail in trying to fix a problem, then we'll keep trying and we'll ask for more help. But you gotta start getting your hands dirty. You can't wait around for someone else to do your work for you.
Speaking of some grassroots leaders in the Yang gang, one of my inspirations while volunteering for the Andrew Yang campaign was Dr. Jermaine Johnson, who happens to be running for the South Carolina 80 House seat right now. He actually was the one that motivated me to add my organizational leadership minor into my studies. Is there any gang? Oh yeah, I saw a discussion he was on, and I was just like, that's what I want to do.
That's so cool. He's a great guy.
Yeah. He is. I hope I get to meet him someday. Maybe at the Azyanggang Summit, whenever that happens.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Are there any Azyanggang leaders that have had a real profound impact on you on the grassroots level?
Well, I would have to say I couldn't have done anything. There's no way that Humanity Forward Arizona would have come together if it wasn't for my fellow former regional organizers. That'd be Ron Russell, who was the first, and Corey Tizka, Angela Mendoza, and Linda King. And also, I couldn't have done it without our primary contacts in each city. These were the city organizers, like yourself, and there's a bunch of others that I could compliment and say and tell you all kinds of things that they did to benefit the movement. So really, it was such a team effort, and I am inspired by the other volunteer leaders in Arizona and how committed they were, and how little guidance I really needed to provide them for them to get going. I saw myself as being mostly in a support role, enabling people to follow through on their ideas and their passion for this movement. As far as outside of Arizona, I really just I have just I have kind of a bromance a little bit. I have to reveal with Tully Arturo Watts over there, and I think he's in Massachusetts, right? Up in New England. That guy moves around a lot, but now there's an inspiring figure. He at 19 he started a journey onto becoming a vegetarian athlete. He moved to China and learned Mandarin, and went to a bunch of bodybuilding conferences. Came back and got involved in different startups, and eventually got into the Yang campaign. And he had this YouTube presence that was very informative throughout the campaign. He was just on it, and he went out to Iowa, knocked doors just like you and I did.
I canvassed with him. He was in Iowa City for a while.
That's awesome. I'm jealous. And I'm still working with him and in contact with him, and I hope we can do some great things in the future. But there's a guy who, like, in the middle of the campaign when the Yang Gang, they were saying, oh, Andrew Yang's going to shock the world. He's going to have 25%, get 25% of the vote in Iowa. And, like, people were just so stuck in a bubble that, like, not really, because we lacked so much political experience, people had no way of knowing where we were at. And a lot of people felt down afterwards. Like, in fact, some people even, like, accused Andrew Yang of lying or building up their expectations. But Tully was there the whole time, making these awesome YouTube videos that were informing people of what the reality really was and what we needed to do as a movement, and how to be effective. And if we had had 10 Arturo Watts in our movement, maybe we really could have won. We need more people like him that are able to, look into the reality, look into the data of the situation, and really throw yourself into solving the problems that are ahead of us. Don't wait for other people. Throw yourself into solving problems with the rest of us. And, really inspiring guy. I hope we can get to the same point where we're inspiring people as much as he has.
Yeah, I'd love to have him on the podcast. I had a great time working with him out in Iowa.
Yeah.
But you bring up an interesting point. Oh, yeah, I'm sure. But you bring up an interesting point about how Andrew may have misled people. And in terms of a leadership perspective, it's like a cardinal rule that you have to project confidence 24/7, or else your followers become so disheartened.
Yeah.
Do you think that is the right way to do it? Do we just need to abide by this archetypal structure of humans, or would it have been better if Andrew was a little bit more,
Yeah.
not realistic,
Yeah.
but maybe cushioned it a little bit more? I remember that night was especially tough when
Yeah.
he dropped out.
Oh yeah, it really was, and I had heard from other leaders throughout the country that the campaign was making plans to continue at least through Nevada and into Super Tuesday, and so for even me at the top of our Arizona organization, I was just completely blindsided, and so you have to project confidence. You have to be able to convince people that you have a way to succeed in your goals, which for Andrew was winning the presidency. Otherwise, you don't get coverage. People don't respect you. People won't support you. You have to provide people that hope, but it has to be a realistic hope, or you have the negative consequences of, not meeting inflated expectations. And I do think, Andrew, I love you. I think you've done so much for humanity and politics. You are the bright light in a world of filled with darkness, really. But I will say that there should have been a little bit more realism. Throughout his run, he said, we'll grow and grow and we'll peak at the right time. And so he gave this expectation that, and he also said we're going to shock the world in Iowa, even though the polls never showed that that was possible to shock everyone with a first, second, or even third place win. We didn't respect the polls. Basically, there was this myth that got around, and I was part of it. I was convinced as well, and it shows you that anyone can get stuck in a bubble. There was this myth that the polls were wrong and that they weren't measuring, younger people or people who love the internet and wouldn't answer their phone for pollsters. So like the main people that were in the Yang Gang, and that theory was completely shattered in Iowa and New Hampshire when the vote results matched polling exactly. And so I think Andrew Yang and Zach Grauman and the rest, they should have known the numbers. They had their own internal polling. They absolutely did know what was happening, and they could have given us at least some clues to cushion the blow a bit. Like, they could have said, "Hey, this is a longer than long shot campaign. We're aiming for Iowa and New Hampshire to defy expectations, get new fundraising, get new volunteers, and just keep building from there. But we have to outperform our polling in Iowa and New Hampshire. And if we don't, then, we'll have to continue the movement in other ways." Like, they could have just said that. It would have taken very few times to say something like that, to give people the comfort, like, hey, this is a movement. We're going to continue no matter what happens with Andrew's presidential run. But hey, Iowa and New Hampshire, that is critical. Let's focus everything on Iowa and New Hampshire. If that was their strategy, they should have been more transparent about
it. Yeah, I know during that time a lot of our supporters were burned. I remember talking to you about the data afterwards, and we just lost a huge amount of people after he dropped. And we really hope we can re-enfranchise them back in our movement with all the work we're doing with Humanity Forward. So there is, I'd like to say to those people, there is hope. And I do believe Andrew did make the right decision with the benefit of hindsight. It really was in his advantage not to be in Super Tuesday. Maybe going to Nevada would have been better. I haven't seen their internal numbers for what they were projecting. Mm-hmm. But I do believe it was the right decision to drop out and be a valuable asset to others rather than have something like Elizabeth Warren did, where she got trounced in her own state and kind of lost a lot of legitimacy in the eyes of her own supporters. But
Right.
I think something people might not realize about you yet, Brendon, is you're a leader on the national level too, so far as you're in the interim board of Humanity First Movement. Can you explain a little bit about what Humanity First Movement is and what you're doing on the board?
Yeah. At least for the next few weeks, my term ends on May 17th, and I'm intending to step down to focus on Arizona. But just a quick recap of what happened in the national movement. So Andrew Yang suspended his campaign, and he said that the Yang Gang wasn't going anywhere, that this was a movement, that we'll be back. And then, mic drop, he got out of there, and him and his team went on vacations and everything. And meanwhile, this volunteer network that he had built up, we were left on our own. There were absolutely problems with ending the presidential campaign and wrapping up. Zach Grauman himself has admitted it publicly in the media that there were mistakes made. And one of the mistakes that were made was that they had elevated all these leaders across the country and didn't send a single email about what we were to expect and what we were supposed to do. But apparently we were supposed to stay in and continue working. And so obviously there were regional organizers in some states that didn't like that approach, and they dropped the ball, and they didn't maintain contact with their members, and they went off to do other things. But there were other regional organizers like myself that stayed in it, and eventually we came together. We had each other's email addresses, and we started having meetings over Zoom to talk about the future of the movement and what we wanted. And through that effort, all of us regional organizers, we were able to schedule a meeting with Zach Grauman and Ethan Dunn, who told us that they wanted to continue working with us in March. And now this was after Humanity Forward was announced. And so once the cat was out of the bag, they were able to tell us more about their plans. And they said that we were the ones who knew best how to grow the movement because of all of our efforts. They were running a presidential campaign. They were focused on, prepping Andrew for debates and media appearances and all that. It's a very different game than building up a movement. And what the volunteer regional organizers were doing was that work of building up the movement. We had the experience to do it. And so they asked us to come up with plans, make proposals with the objective of growing the Yang Gang 10 times by 2024. And now that's been changed. It's growing Humanity Forward 10 times by 2024. And and when we were given that directive, the whole Yang Gang, all of our creative abilities and leadership abilities, it all came together, and we had elections with ranked choice voting to elect a 11-person interim board that could be the executive branch, if you will, to make sure that things get done in a timely manner, that we fulfill our objective of growing the Yang Gang. And from the interim board, we formed working groups to focus on different aspects of that. So how do we create better or respect diversity, encourage inclusion in our movement? How do we organize ourselves? How do we have the best communications? How do we grow our movement? How do we get new followers? How do we do it all? So we started building up the network, and what we decided is that we would continue electing our own leaders of this network through ranked choice voting at first, and then later we switched to approval voting, which we don't need to get into here, but and we also decided we would switch out half of the board every 6 weeks. so that we're constantly getting new people into that executive position to get experience, to provide new ideas, so that our organization is agile as possible. And from that, we started having meetings with Erica Mcleod, the director of operations of Humanity Forward, and we are actively helping her. All of the working groups are actively giving her new information and new ideas and new plans that is helping her create the official Humanity Forward organization throughout the country. So Humanity First movement is, you could think of it as the volunteer wing of Humanity Forward. Humanity Forward is going to do their thing in New York, launch these UBI trials, send out these micro grants. They're going to continue media appearances, the podcast, all of those juicy details you see on cable news. And meanwhile, they're going to be sending us resources and guidance on how to grow the movement while all that is going on. And it's our responsibility to do it.
I think that's very informative for the people who might not realize exactly what the Humanity First movement is quite yet.
Yeah,
we are still rather new, but we all of us are just came together very very recently, and it will take. And if you do want to get back involved, the Slack channel is open for everyone, and you can. They're very transparent in how to do their meetings and how the working groups work. I'd recommend getting involved if you maybe were dropped out at some point or you were a little fatigued and needing a break. There is action items for right now that we especially need help on.
Yeah, and it's important to take a break, man. This last campaign, that was the most like roller coaster, exhausting campaign I've ever been on in my career. And for so many people being novices and having no experience in politics, have gone through the Yang campaign, it's like, and then to have a pandemic follow it, it's like, take care of yourselves, people. We are going through a lot. We're like, given all of the challenges, we have accomplished so much. And I would just encourage everyone, treat yourself well, make sure you're taking care of the basics, but also when you're ready to jump in, we're doing great things and we could use your help.
Speaking of challenges, I have a couple questions to ask you. So what is there an example of a person that was in our organization that became a resistor, someone who was maybe miffed or disenfranchised with our movement and started detracting from it? Did you have any experiences like that? And if you had, how did you handle it?
I'm happy to say that we didn't have anyone that comes to mind, at least, that acted that way, that was a resistor. Now, what I can say, maybe that is because we had a unique set of leaders that were able to prevent resistors from even getting started. And I'll tell you what I mean by that is that we had organized in April as the Arizona Yang Gang. We had volunteer leaders step up and start the volunteer side of the campaign in Arizona. We were having regular meetings and coming up with plans and everything, and organizing events, and eventually we were doing trainings for phone banking and canvassing and so forth. But there were a handful of people that would come on to one at a time, of course, that they would appear on our Facebook page and they would start criticizing, and they'd be like, I just switched to the Yang campaign from the Buttigieg campaign, and it really makes me worried about this campaign because it seems like you're so you haven't been organized, you're not active. Like, who is we need to start doing this and this and this, and they would just kind of criticize and try to assert control because they were worried about whatever. And I realized that we had failures. There were weaknesses in our campaign early on because we were such a long shot. Like, no one in the established Democratic Party volunteer networks thought that Andrew Yang had a chance to even get onto the debate stage in the beginning. No one knew who he was. The mainstream media was giving him very little time to make a pitch to the American people. Like, we were up against so much, and what we were able to do we're proud of, but it did pale in comparison to some other presidential campaigns. We had such a lack of resources and experience. And so I get why people would come in and start pointing fingers and thinking that, like, oh, I need to take over because they obviously dropped the ball, and they just, it's easy to judge right in the beginning when you don't know the real challenges behind the scenes. And so this happened multiple times. I can think of 3 people right now that I won't name. And if they're listening, we've developed a great relationship since then. My strategy really was that whenever that happened and we had detractors, that I personally take it upon myself, and the other leaders took it upon themselves to talk to them, to discuss with them respectfully about the different challenges and what they wanted, and we made them feel heard, and we made them feel part of the team, and that there was a path forward to work together. And all 3 of those people that had that initial approach that was resisting or detracting or critical, they later became leaders. We elevated them as leaders, and we were like, we recognize your passion and that you care so much, and we want to empower you to bring that passion and contribute to our movement. So the learning experience from that, I hope people pick up is, some people might seem like they're trying to bring you down, and it might feel like you have to shut them down and push them out, but you might be losing a valuable ally, potential ally, if you just put in the work to respect them, to talk through their problems, and to make them feel like they're part of the team. So don't lose great volunteers just because they, are frustrated. Frustrations happen. Frustrations are inevitable. It's how we deal with them that's important.
That's really important that you guys had that approach. We needed to be able to demonstrate wholeheartedly about our values, especially when we encounter people that may be more critical of us. We're going to be wrapping up soon, but I have one final question for you.
Cool.
We're going to be a little bit more personal again. What was the biggest obstacle you've overcame in your life, campaign or personally related?
Wow, the greatest obstacle. I can think of obstacles I have right now that I need to get over. Can you believe I'm one of those guys that was working out like 2 or 3 times a week. I love going to the gym, and since the pandemic hit, quarantine hit, I have done no exercise. And I've had a lot on my plate, but that's what comes to mind first. But you're probably looking for something a little different.
Let's talk about one you maybe overcame.
Yeah. Well, I will say that everyone faces this problem, but it's the challenge of growing up and finding yourself. That's the one I'm the most proud of. I think everyone, some of us come from great families. Some of us come from families that are struggling with different issues. Some of us didn't have families. I had a great family, but my parents aren't perfect, and they'll admit that. They were often, didn't provide me a lot of support in my aspirations for political activism and community organizing. They encouraged me to follow my passions, but because my parents, they weren't politically active at all. They didn't follow politics or the news at all. And there was just a real disconnect when I started getting involved in different campaigns with like what the point was or what the future was for me, especially when I would work what was effectively a full-time job in a lot of cases for no pay. And I got to the point where I had lots of credit card debt, thousands of dollars of credit card debt, because I was hoping for a paid position that never came to be. And I've been in situations where I've had to, frankly, live out of my car and not have a place to put my computer to rest other than my car, and working out of coffee houses and so forth. So that's not as bad as some people have it. Some people really are homeless for a long period of time. I can say that I was homeless just for a few months at a time, but it was a struggle to be involved in activism that doesn't pay sometimes at all, and pays very little in different situations, and have my family who's accustomed to a certain level of comfort they had to watch me go through that, and they sometimes thought it was unhealthy, and that I needed to focus on getting a paid job and having the kind of middle class life that they enjoyed. And so it was very hard to maintain my ideals and my aspirations for being an activist and an organizer and solving the huge problems that I saw in society. And I can say, after many years of struggling, trying to find my place, that I really have found it. And I found my confidence, and I don't require the approval of others to keep doing what I'm doing. And um, other people, I hope people don't have to go through the same exact struggle that I had with uh, fighting for what I believe in. I hope it's much easier for others. But for those that are in situations where it's tough for them financially or otherwise, but they have this big dream and they feel a calling to something bigger than them, uh, to help other people, that is, I just would love to give a shout out to those people. You're some of the best people on this planet in my book, and the world goes around because of you, because of your sacrifices. And it's going to seem dark in a lot of times, because we get so little credit in our society for putting everything on the line and trying to make the world a better place. People say that we're dreamers, say that we're foolish. They'll say that we're wasting our time. But I just want to encourage you that you are the hope for our whole civilization. I'm not exaggerating there at all. If we don't have enough people like you that are willing to sacrifice and rise to this calling to help change the world, none of us are going to have a future. And we need you. We need you to fight for human civilization. We humans have been through a lot. We've been through hundreds of years of exploitation and war and famine and disease, and we've come so far. It would be such a shame for our whole civilization to have gotten this far, to have a liberal democratic world order with free trade and computer technology and virtual reality. And it would be such a shame for it all to crumble and for it to not matter in the long run. It's up to people like you who are willing to put it all on the line and fight, no matter what the challenges are, to save us. And if we have to come together, there's people like you that can help you. Reach out. You don't have to be an island. You don't have to take it all on yourself. There's other people that will recognize your passion and your commitment to changing the world and will help you. We're all in this together, but keep at it. Don't give up. Never give up. We can't give up.
Well, thank you for being so inspiring and forthcoming with your thoughts, Brendon. Everyone in Arizona and all the Yang Gang across the country respect and admire you.
I appreciate that. I hope so. But if anyone thinks I can do a better job in anything, I'm open to criticism too. I think that's really important as leaders that don't think that you're impervious to criticism.
Well, you heard it, viewers. Make sure you trash Brendon in the comments. Apparently, that's right. What he wants to see.
I'll take it. No, but thanks, Kyle. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun, and I hope we can get some more episodes recorded soon. And it's just going to get bigger and better from here, man.
For sure. So we want to thank everyone for watching with us. Anyone who needs any help during these times, reach out to the Humanity Forward COVID Relief Fund. They are doing their best to give people some relief during these times. If you want to volunteer as a Humanity Hang moderator or a COVID relief caller, visit movehumanityforward.com and apply. We need all the help we can get. Volunteer positions in Arizona are still open. Our most dire need is a treasurer, someone to run our finances so we can start fundraising, so we can start getting relief to families, so we can start moving forward in our mission. We want to remind you all that the better future is still possible. Please come fight with us. And it only takes one step forward. Thank you all. Have a good one.
Thanks.